Yeah, many people are questioning themselves about, Trump's term, what he's going to achieve, what he's going to do. And many Christians have their hope in Trump, knowing that Trump may change a lot of things in this world. We've seen that Trump is trying to fight for the peace in Ukraine, but also we're wondering about the peace in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Israel and Gaza, and all these places where there's conflict. And we believe that the USA have influence that can also bring peace to many conflicts on the planet. So I believe with the help of Dr. Peter Hammond, we're going to see what Trump has achieved so far and how that is related to the Bible or is not related. We greet you in the mighty name of Jesus, and thank you once again for taking your time and watch this video. I know that today's video will be talking mainly about peace, and the Bible tells us that only in God we can have peace, but in the world we will have tribulation. But let's see the kind of peace that we have in the world compared to the peace that we have in God. Welcome, Dr. Peter Hammond. How are you?
Praising God.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
I would like you to present yourself before we tackle this issue about the peace of Ukraine, and then we can take it from there. Welcome to present yourself.
My first mission field was being a soldier in the South African infantry. I started a Bible study and a prayer fellowship. We met every night for Bible study and prayer throughout our time of national service, and we had Bible studies all the way across the border, up in Southwest Africa and in Angola. Many soldiers were brought to Christ. We proclaimed the gospel vigorously, and the Lord guided us through our all-night prayer meetings to start a mission that would focus on restricted access areas or persecuted churches to help those who are being persecuted for their faith. So our first mission fields were Mozambique and Angola, the so-called frontline states who were opposed to South Africa at that time. We later went further up to the Congo, to northern Nigeria, to Rwanda, to Sudan, and ministered even as far as the Nuba Mountains of Sudan. Behind the Iron Curtain, throughout Eastern Europe during the dark days when the communists were persecuting Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania. So I've ministered in 38 countries, including in 8 war zones, and by God's grace, we've seen God answer prayer and change countries. We've seen countries that used to be closed, now open for the gospel. We saw the Berlin Wall come down, the Iron Curtain collapse. So we're very concerned for peace, because you cannot effectively advance the gospel in a situation where the Bible is illegal and where churches are under war conditions and being persecuted, churches being burned. Blessed are the peacemakers. We need to be peacemakers. We need to be praying for peace. Amen. So that the gospel can advance.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And I know that you and I both agree that when Donald Trump was looking for the voice of the people to be elected as a president of the United States, he made a lot of promises, especially to Christians, which Christians having hope in him that there is a lot of things that can change not only in the United States of America, but also elsewhere on the planet. Yeah. Do you really think Trump is going to achieve something that will be helpful to all of us before we talk about the peace?
Well, I think he already has. During his first term in office back over 4 years ago, we saw the first thing he did was he defunded Planned Parenthood. That Planned Parenthood, trying to use American taxpayers' monies to fund abortions in Africa, even South Africa, for example, he defunded. So he pulled back from using taxpayers' money to help abortions, especially abortions overseas. And for the first time, America had a president who actually changed the balance of power in the US Supreme Court to make sure that there were enough pro-life judges to reverse the Roe v. Wade and to throw abortion back to the local state. So he did achieve a lot already on the pro-life side. He certainly has a track record of being the most pro-life president America's had so far. They've had other presidents who've claimed to be pro-life, but they didn't achieve anything. And he's the only president of the United States who attended March for Life rallies, for example. So he has achieved quite a bit on that. He made a lot of other promises for this term too. For example, he promised to close the border, to stop illegal aliens coming across the border. He certainly did. He mobilized the army. They've continued with building the wall, and they did stop border crossings. They did start the massive deportation of illegal aliens, especially those who were criminals, who'd been rapists, murderers, thieves, assaulted people, people involved in human trafficking, drug trafficking, children trafficking. So he's followed up that promise. He started massive deportations, which people thought were not possible, of criminals who have come into the country illegally and have undermined the country, especially in terms of crime. And it does seem some countries had actually emptied their prisons into America. They let people, dangerous criminals even, gang members out, and they pushed them towards the American border. And many of these countries actually saw a decrease in crime in their own countries because the criminals were now exported to America. So very foolish policies of Joe Biden have been reversed. He's also bringing the price of petrol down because he's gone back to oil sufficiency so that America can drill their own oil, including offshore drilling and up in Alaska. What he did beforehand, in his first term, he's returned to making America energy self-sufficient, and that will have the effect of bringing the price of petrol down worldwide. That isn't good news for Russia because Russia depends a lot on oil exports and gas exports for their currency. And so under Biden provided the biggest boom in Russian economy by making America close down so much of their oil production, made them depend on more imports, and as a result, the price of oil worldwide went up under Biden. So that's something that affects all of us, the price of petrol, and that affects everything, airfares, bus fares, the price of goods in the shops. But on another level, probably the most important from many of our perspectives culturally, he made it a policy of the government, there's only two genders, male and female. So return to common sense, and no more men and women's sports, no more men and women's bathrooms. Nobody can change their gender, and we're not going to recognize these people who claim to be biological women when they're actually biological men, and so on. So he did a lot of good there. He stopped this transitioning people from male to female surgeries. So no more mastectomies, castrations, gender affirming care, as they call it, which is genital mutilation, actually. And when they are using taxpayers' money to change impressionable kids to go into expensive surgery, which you can never reverse, and so on. So those are good things. We also think it's obviously a very good thing that he made the promise to bring the war in Ukraine to an end. I mean, that's magnificent because it suited the previous administration to keep the war going. Remember, there was a lot of corruption. You had Hunter Biden making $156 million from being a member of the board of Burisma, which is a primary oil and gas company in Ukraine. And the Hunter Biden family connection was part of a crime syndicate of the whole Biden family. You can see how Biden was so corrupt. He actually blackmailed the government of Ukraine that they had to fire their prosecutor general. And he gave them 6 hours, or he is not going to give them the $1 billion in American aid that was needed. This is when Biden was vice president under Obama. And he boasted of this, that in fact they fired the prosecutor general who was investigating his son and the Burisma holdings for their corruption. And so Ukraine's a very corrupt country. And of course, with America throwing hundreds of billions of dollars at them, the corruption got even more. And the Biden family personally were enriched through it. I'm sure many other American companies were enriched as well by the $300 billion odd that America's poured into Ukraine to keep the war going. So obviously that's a bad investment. And remember that first and foremost, Donald Trump is a businessman. And he looks at this and says, what a waste of money. And this is unacceptable. So I don't know if it's the concern for the war as much as the concern for this is a waste of American money and we shouldn't be there. He says he wants to see the people stop dying and he'd like to see peace. He wants to be known as a peacemaker. Well, that's an admirable goal. Bless a lot of peacemakers. So he has stopped the money flowing to Ukraine, started to tell Ukraine, you've got to start paying up. You've got minerals. You've got to pay us. We're not just going to give you money free. If you're going to get anything in from us in the future, you must start to provide us with rare earth minerals. I presume he's thinking of things like gold and uranium and cobalt and coal and whatever else they've got. And as he said, whatever we can get. I mean, he wants a deal. This is the master of the art of the deal. I think he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. So this is what we are seeing. We're seeing America going back to a business-like way of thinking. And he promised governmental efficiency. Well, they have gone like with a chainsaw axe throughout these departments. They've fired tens of thousands of government employees. They've cut departments. They've closed down whole departments. They've found tremendous amount of waste. I think every country should have a Department of Governmental Efficiency. Imagine how much money we could save the poor taxpayer.
Yeah, based on what you've seen and heard, the achievement of Donald Trump, especially since he took the power. Now, will you describe Trump as a Christian, or will you describe Trump as a leader that acknowledges the existence of God? Which one will you choose between the two?
Well,
and why?
I believe the only real Christians are born-again Christians, those who have been regenerate by the power of the Holy Spirit and bear the fruits of the Spirit. I do not know Donald Trump's heart. The fact that I know is he was brought up in a Presbyterian church, and he had a pastor who's pretty well known, and that was the man who wrote The Power of Positive Thinking. It's Norman Vincent Peale. So Norman Vincent Peale was his pastor. So if you look at Donald Trump, you can see Exhibit A, The Power of Positive Thinking. I don't know if he is born again. I don't see evidence of that offhand, but I see he's friendly to Christians, he's positive to Christians, he respects Christians, he seems to fear and respect God. He has made many positive comments towards God, unlike the Democrats who booed God, literally, or the Golden Globes or the Academy Awards where they ridicule God and they're hostile. Donald Trump seems respectful to God. And he's even told people we must get back to reading the Bible. We need to go back to God. You need to pray. You need to read the scriptures. So he has continually appealed to the higher authority, way, way, way above me. He says we need to return to God. Only God can save this country. So he said some good things. He's done some good things. Of course, there's other things where we would say he seems very secular and in some ways even worldly. I mean, he does own casinos and things like that. But the interesting thing is, he's brought up his sons to not drink alcohol, to not smoke, to not do drugs, don't get tattoos, and you never gamble. And his sons even said, I heard this from his sons giving their testimony, how their dad told him, you don't gamble. He said, but don't we own gambling casinos? And his father said, gambling is for chumps, not trumps. The house always wins. So he's got an interesting lifestyle. I mean, did you know he doesn't even drink alcohol, ever?
Yeah.
Very unusual for a hotel owner and a magnate and a president for that matter.
I think he does that for a different reason.
Well, yes, we're not saying it's because he's born again. He's doing, but he's got a cleaner lifestyle in some ways than, I'm sorry to say, some pastors.
Okay, now that is fine. But let's talk a little bit about now the peace of Ukraine, which is around the corner, and the negotiation are, going on still. We have seen what Zelensky was saying on the social media that he's not happy that Putin can sit with Donald Trump and decide what Ukraine want for themselves. And according to him, he was complaining that he wanted to be included in the decision making because, he's leading Ukraine at the moment. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. But by the way, we have 3 conflicts which are mainly, we have more in the world, but these are the most popular. The war in Ukraine and Russia. We have the one in Democratic Republic of Congo, and the one in Israel and Gaza. The point that I want to say that we only see Donald Trump focus on one, and he also rejects bomb on the other. For example, in the conflict in Israel and Gaza, he said that he's going to support the Israel regardless, no matter what they do. He's going to support them. But we see that in Ukraine, he's doing all his best to make sure that these people have peace. Do you think that even if you bring that peace, the people in Ukraine are more valuable than the people in Gaza?
No, there's no question that the people in Ukraine are more valuable than Gaza. People are people, and all human life is valuable and precious, and we should always be pro-life, and we should be anti-war and anti-aggression and anti-terrorism. And any targeting of civilians is terrorism and needs to be rejected. But to be fair, it is America's responsibility to stop the war in Ukraine because they're the ones who basically started it, to be honest. You look back, the war didn't begin in 2022 3 years ago when when the Russians invaded. The war began back in 2014 when the American government sponsored a coup d'etat that overthrew the elected government of Ukraine and put in a puppet regime that was basically a client state of the United States. Victoria Nuland of the US State Department boasted that she invested $5 billion, that's 5 billion with a B, US dollars, in bring about the coup, the regime change, as they like to call it, in Ukraine. The previous government in Ukraine had laws against homosexual grooming of kids and against the LGBTQ agenda. But the new regime that the Americans brought to power in 2014, they legalized the LGBTQ agenda. And so in many ways, the war's about the LGBTQ agenda that Obama pushed. Obama tried to provoke Russia into this situation. So under Barack Hussein Obama, the US State Department invested $6 billion in buying up or creating new media platforms in Ukraine, TV stations, radio stations, newspapers, magazines, that brought down the previous government, whipped up the people into the streets, and this was one of these color revolutions led by cell phones, aided by USAID, who funded a lot, and the State Department funded the rest. But between USAID and the State Department, they brought to power this regime in Ukraine that then banned the Russian language as a minority language. Russian is a major language, especially the people in eastern Ukraine. They're placed with 95% Russian ethnically and linguistically in eastern Ukraine, Luhansk and Donetsk in the Donbass region. And those people, of course, were furious when they weren't given autonomy and their minority language rights were trampled on. So they sought autonomy, were refused, and then they seceded. They had referendums and they decided to become independent countries, and they applied to Russia to please protect them. For 8 years, the Ukrainian government from 2014 started to pour rockets, artillery, air attacks, infantry attacks into Luhansk and Donetsk in Donbass region, eastern Ukraine. 14,000 civilians, at least, many estimates are higher, were killed by the Ukrainian army between 2014 and 2022. So the war didn't start in 2022. The war actually started back in 2014, and America effectively started the war. And you can't get away from that. When the media was telling us that Russia invaded on the 26th of February 2022, unprovoked aggression. Well, it was aggression, but it wasn't unprovoked. That's a lie. America provoked this. Now, Putin did a few things to try and stop the war. First of all, he warned them, don't try, he didn't stop the coup, but said, don't try and join the EU, don't try and join NATO. And next thing, America kept fast-tracking, pushing Ukraine to join NATO and the European Union, even talking about them adopting the euro as the currency. And Russia couldn't tolerate that. This is the political and military equivalent of when Russia tried to put military bases and missiles in Cuba, 1963, which almost caused a world war. And the world was so close to a nuclear holocaust back in 1963 because Russia irresponsibly invaded America's backyard and sponsored a coup, helped get Castro to power, and then were putting missiles and bases in there. And the Americans were willing to go to nuclear war to stop Russia establishing a base of operations in Cuba, because Cuba was in the American hemisphere, in the American sphere of influence, in their backyard. Well, Ukraine is the equivalent of Cuba, even more so, in Russia's backyard. And so for America to have said to Russia, you can't put military bases and missiles in Cuba, fair enough. But then America shouldn't try to put military bases and missiles in Ukraine. And so Vladimir Putin, as president of Russia, sought guarantees that Ukraine wouldn't join NATO. He was just rebuffed. No, Ukraine is going to join NATO. Ukraine is going to join the EU. Ukraine's going to have the euro as the currency. And then in January 2022, Vladimir Putin sought assurances from President Biden in the White House that America would not put military bases or missiles in Ukraine. Biden refused to give the guarantee. In February 2022, President Putin requested an urgent meeting with President Biden to avert the crisis in Ukraine. Biden just ignored him. And so then Russia invaded. So you can't say it was unprovoked Russian aggression. Russia was put into a strategic corner. Bear in mind, Ukraine is just the last in a long series of provocations. Back when the Berlin Wall collapsed, the Iron Curtain collapsed, now we're talking about 1989, the German government sought permission that they could rejoin, that East and West Germany could rejoin. And the American Secretary of State at that time sought Russia to approve that East Germany can join Germany and become part of NATO. And the Russians sought guarantees that you don't advance any further east. And in fact, the Americans said, quote unquote, not a foot east. We won't go any further than the East German border. So we are grateful to be able to take East Germany and make that part of NATO, but we won't go any further. Well, since then, they've taken all the previous Soviet satellites, Poland, Czech, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, they've all joined NATO. Even Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which we used to be provinces of the old Russia, the old Soviet Union even. And they even have been trying to get Georgia, which is way over in the Caucasian Mountains, and of course Ukraine, as part of NATO. So at a certain point, it's understandable, Russia would have said, niet, no further. This was provoked. So America is very responsible for the war in Ukraine. And they put, according to the President of America, $350 billion into Ukraine, mostly in terms of weapons. So the war in Ukraine is funded by the United States, and many of the weapons in Ukraine are American. Even the missiles fired into Russia from Ukraine are American missiles, which probably couldn't be operated by the Ukrainians. It's highly sophisticated missiles that probably American personnel had to be there, either training them, supervising them, or even operating the missiles themselves. This is as good as America fighting Russia or declaring war on Russia. So America's got a far greater responsibility to end the war in Ukraine, especially as it has the danger of developing and escalating, deteriorating into a full nuclear exchange between Russia and America, which could have happened any time in the last 3 years. The provocations to Russia have been so great, they've crossed the red line so many times, that I don't think it's that the United States president doesn't care about the Congo or other people in Israel or Gaza. It's their personal responsibility to stop their proxy war. America was using Ukraine as a weapon against Russia. Just like when I was in Angola, in the South African Army, we knew, yes, we were fighting Cubans and Angolans, but to all of us, we were fighting Russia. It was the Soviet Union behind Angola and the Cubans. They were using Soviet weapons. They were paid by the Soviets. The Soviets were providing ammunition, the rockets, the fuel, everything. So while we were fighting Cubans and Angolans in Angola, we always understood that was a proxy war. They were just the surrogates. The Soviets were the real enemy. Behind them was Russia.
Don't you think that the American found as well the war in Gaza and Israel, because the UN, the first supporter of UN, the first boss of UN is the United States of America. Yes. And the United States of America are the one that put a motion in the United States to create a state which is called Israel today. And now the conflict is there, which they are not able to manage, and people are dying. Don't you think it's still the same responsibility in that sense?
You make a good case when you say that, because the United States, and by the way, the Soviet Union, voted for the State of Israel, and America helped sponsor it. But Russia wanted the State of Israel too in the Middle East. And I mean, that's back in the days of the Soviet Union. I think it was, for them, excellent in that it caused rivalries and frictions that made all the Arab countries want to join arms race to compete with Israel. And so Russia got client states all over the Middle East, from Arab states that wanted their weapons to counter the American weapons that were now in Israel. And so the Cold War and the arms race and the military-industrial complex, both in the United States and in the Soviet Union, benefited from the birth of the State of Israel, which is why they both voted for the State of Israel in the Security Council in the United Nations. But you make a strong case that America has got a responsibility for the war in the Middle East too. But I don't think Donald Trump sees it quite the same way. I think he's thinking, that's more older history. More recent history is we picked a fight with Russia and Ukraine.
Okay,
so I agree that America should see a responsibility to bring about peace in the Middle East. Absolutely. But I don't think they see it the same way at all. I think they look at Ukraine and Israel very differently.
Let's also use a good example of Congo. I know this is the value of the United States as well, the European Union. They believe that people should be free to choose whoever they choose to lead them.
Yes.
And according to their values, that they don't have a place for somebody who takes power by arms. Those are their own
Coup
values.
d'etats, revolutions,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
unless they did it themselves.
absolutely.
Because
Now,
the US State Department has sponsored many revolutions and coups around the world, even assassinations of presidents.
absolutely. Now, my question is this, because if you see, for example, in Democratic Republic of Congo, it has been proven that the people who are causing that case is Rwandan government. The European Union agree with that. The United States agree with that. The United Nations agree with that. All the news all over on the social media says exactly the same thing. So don't you think that they don't value the freedom of the integrity territorial of that country as well? And as the superpower, they're supposed to have influence. I saw that they also engage in sanctions against the Rwandan government. The United States sanctioned Rwanda, the European Union sanctioned Rwanda, and also end up the agreement of minerals that they have with Rwanda as well, the European Union. But my point is that what that has to help the people in Congo, because people are dying every day. Today there was a meeting and people died with a bomb. So in things of that nature, why don't you think Trump has the responsibility as a superpower to end that as well?
I don't think Donald Trump personally has the same responsibility as the American government going back all the way to Eisenhower, because while I don't see the conflict in Congo quite the same as you do, I'm very sympathetic to the people in Rwanda. Having ministered in there, and I do think the Rwandese people, well, they were treated awfully by the Hutu governments of the MIND and the genocide they suffered back in 1994. And the French government aided the Interahamwe to evacuate behind Operation Turquoise. The French paratroopers parachuted into Rwanda to enable the Interahamwe mass murderers to escape. And Zaire, under Mobutu Sese Seko, welcomed them. And unfortunately, the Congo government, for good or ill, has provided hospitality to some degree to the Hutu, who were also related to, or were the actual culprits for the genocide in Rwanda. So I think Rwanda sees some of their duty to defend their homeland to prevent any genocide occurring again.
By going to another country.
Well, I believe that's what they're doing, because the fact is, Rwanda, the Congo is a failed state, but that's a bigger story. So the government of the Congo are not protecting their own citizens. They're not protecting the integrity of the borders. They're not dealing with the many armed groups in the country, which include 12 other nations' armies. There are soldiers from all over Africa in Rwanda. The South African army was there not long ago. They've just been withdrawn, I believe. You had Zimbabwean army, Angolan, Namibian, even Central African Republic, Sudan, Tanzanians, Central African Republic, Chad. Many armies were in the Congo, not to mention the largest United Nations peacekeeping force on earth. More UN troops in the Congo than anywhere else, and yet there's more violence in the Congo than anywhere else. So obviously the UN peacekeepers are complete and utter failure. But I think you can go back to blame the chaos and the failed state in the Congo on the US presidency of Eisenhower. President Eisenhower bullied the Belgians to evacuate the Congo before the Congo was ready for independence. And the Belgians warned there will be chaos if we leave now. And the American government said, it doesn't matter. You've got to get out. And self-determination, all that. Well, the first president, the first prime minister in the Congo was Patrice Lumumba, who I think was assassinated by the CIA anyway.
I know that.
He, of course, was not a good person. He is a communist himself and caused a lot of chaos himself. Nevertheless, the fact is, the Congo became the playground, the battleground of the superpowers. And you can blame the Soviet Union, Red China, and the United States for a lot of the chaos in the Congo at its inception, and to an extent, even to this day.
But as you said, that the CIA killed Lumumba, which everybody is aware of, and the Kabila, the one who was, invented
the elder Kabila.
Yeah, the father of this so-called Kabila. But my point is that if you look at the United States president, made a speech in Rwanda by saying that he's going to kill him, and not even 2 weeks after that, he was killed. So
I did not know that.
There is, even on social media, is there. Now, my point is that the case was created by the United States as well. And because even if Lumumba was not somebody who was, good or whatever, but those are the people that, the people of Congo wanted for themselves. It's like Ramaphosa here, for example, in South Africa. There's many people who disagree with Ramaphosa's.
Whether you like the president or not, you should not be sponsoring assassinations of presidents in other countries in particular. And so the United States has done this all over the world. Now, this is the deep state. And to be fair, the present president of America, Donald Trump, is not personally responsible for this.
No, I'm not saying him.
He's inherited,
not responsible.
but the deep state, but the deep state of America is definitely responsible. They've got blood all over their fingers. The military-industrial complex benefited from this. The oil companies as well. There was a lot of evil that went on, and the chaos that they caused. I'm also sympathetic to the people of Katanga. The Katangan people seceded from the Congo, went to chaos. They said, we are seceding from communist chaos. And the United Nations invaded Katanga. And that included US transports, US pilots flying C-120s, C-130s, bringing the invading forces into Katanga. And they destroyed a stable pro-Christian country in the south of the Congo and forced them to rejoin the chaos of this failed state of the Congo. So the United States government has a lot of responsibility for the chaotic shambles that led to the deaths of millions of people. And it's a fact of history, although it's a bit bizarre, to think that when the Simbas, who were a Maoist, Red Chinese-backed Marxist revolutionary group, the Simbas swept in and took a lot of Eastern Congo back in 1964. They captured a lot of people, and for example, the mayor of Stanleyville, which today is Kisangani, they made this poor mayor, who was a Congolese man, stand naked in the middle of this village square while they ripped his liver out, ate his liver before the man's eyes as he died in the village square. They took missionaries, nuns, priests, Catholic priests, Protestant, and they sacrificed them on an altar in front of a huge picture, a giant picture of Patrice Lumumba, the martyred Marxist prime minister who has passed at that stage. And the French Foreign Legion failed to turn up in time. The Belgian paratroopers were mobilized and they arrived late. But it was up to mercenaries, mostly from Rhodesia and South Africa, recruited in Salisbury and in Johannesburg. The mercenaries saved these civilians. And they came up in jeeps and all that. Moise Chombe recruited them into the Congolese army. And so under Colonel Mike Hoare, the Five Commander, or the Wild Geese, as they're famously known, swept into Eastern Congo. And back then the roads were still pretty good. They were able to get into Stanleyville, or what today is Kisangani, in time to rescue thousands of people, civilians who were about to be massacred, who were being sacrificed. One of the first Christian books I ever read when I was converted back in 1977 was Out of the Jaws of the Lions, because the Simbas call themselves the Lions. Simbas means lions. Interesting that the Western armies failed to save even their own citizens, but the mercenaries, who are not normally respected, they saved these nuns and monks, and there were nuns coming and kissing these rough mercenaries who had come up under Colonel Mike Hoare, the Wild Geese. And the things these people had been rescued from, it was absolutely hideous, but that was a creation of Western governments that abandoned these people, and Eastern governments like Red China and Soviet Union who stirred up communist revolution. And I don't think that those scars have ever been healed. Those things have never been redressed. Justice has never been done. But hundreds of missionaries were slaughtered. Tens of thousands of Christians were murdered. Millions of people ultimately, in Eastern Congo in particular, in these upheavals. So shame on these mineral companies and these governments and these superpowers that brought this about. And the people of the Congo today are left with this tragic legacy of a country sabotaged at its inception. And so that's relevant. But personally, I don't know if President Trump or his supporters even know about the history of the Congo. I doubt that any of them understand it. And therefore, I don't think they feel any responsibility, even though their government and the deep state have deep responsibility. But that's why they're not looking at the same, because the Ukraine's in recent memory and it's been documented, and they know we are responsible for the war in the Congo. And Donald Trump's even admitted this, that, Biden's administration started it. He said this war would never have started if I was president, because he wouldn't have allowed Zelensky to even think about joining NATO. As he said, forget about it. You're not joining NATO. That's what started this whole war in the beginning.
Do you think that in the world there is any fair election? Just I don't think so, because we
Not
see
many.
in the United States there's complaints about election every time that they proclaim their election. We've seen in Europe even recently there's a European country which their election was cancelled.
Romania.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, when we look at all these things, same applies to Africa. But we see, for example, whatever the European and American would call dictator, for example, Kagame's supposed to be one because they've been ruling for about 25 years now, and he's been the only president. Now, besides...
Now you talk about Rwanda.
Yes, Rwanda. Now, let's take a good example as well. Gaddafi was killed, so-called, that he was a dictator. And there have never been a country that lived a better life on the planet, like Libya at the time of Gaddafi.
He had a very high standard of living.
Absolutely. Now, but, the entire superpowers, they came together, especially NATO, and they killed him in the name of democracy.
They did.
But now you can say that...
And they created this tsunami of refugees fleeing what used to be stable countries in North Africa into Europe.
Absolutely.
And again, that's what NATO did that. So NATO claimed,
Absolutely.
Russia shouldn't be afraid of NATO. We're just a defensive alliance and we're only for Europe. But what was NATO doing in Afghanistan? What was NATO doing bombing Libya? What was NATO doing bombing also in Syria? They were involved in so many countries bombing. NATO was even bombing in Somalia, for goodness sake. What did that have to do with defensive alliance in North Atlantic? So NATO has been aggressive and expansionistic. They expanded 6 times in waves towards Russia. They have taken up and included now amongst them not only previous satellites and allies of Russia, but even countries that used to be states within Russia, provinces. So plainly, Russia's got every reason to fear NATO. And the other thing that's very concerning is that Vladimir Putin, as president of Russia, applied to join NATO back in 1999
They refused.
and in 2007. Now, if NATO was a defensive alliance, they would have been happy to have Russia as part of it. So Russia's got every reason to think NATO is just anti-Russia.
Absolutely.
Because what other purpose does it have now? The Soviet Union is gone. The communist threat is gone. Why are they not allowing Russia to join NATO? If Russia had joined NATO, Russia wouldn't have been forced to make treaties with China. But when all of NATO and Europe and the United States put sanctions on Russia, Russia had no alternative but to do the best deal they could for markets and raw materials with their neighbors, India, Iran, Red China. And if we didn't want to push Russia towards China, we shouldn't have sanctioned them. And so
I agree.
Russia could be part of NATO today if they'd been more positive. But first Clinton and later George Bush said no to Russia joining NATO. So I think America really is responsible to sort out the war in Ukraine. And friends of mine who work as missionaries in Ukraine, including people who studied at our Great Commission course here, are working with the Ukrainians in Europe now. They've reported back and said, when America stops making money out of the war in Ukraine, the war will stop. And so America has a responsibility. Cut the funds, stop the corruption, and as a result, the war will come to an end. As soon as America lost the will to fund the war in Ukraine, the war would end. And that's what's happened. Donald Trump came to power with an express mandate, and he promised to end the war in Ukraine. So he has got an obligation to end it in Ukraine. Now, I wish he would also do what he could. And we're not asking America to send troops to Israel or to send troops to the Congo. But if they could just cut the funding for the groups that are doing the violence, the wars could come to an end. So it's like a fuel fire. In the fire brigade, there's different ways to fight a fire. But if it's an electric fire or a fuel fire, you cut off the source. And then the fire will come out. When it runs out of fuel, the flames will end.
To the best of my knowledge, I know that a thief and the buyer from the thief, they are exactly the same. The European Union have a contract of the minerals that Rwanda does not have a mining of and don't produce. And yet they were buying those minerals, knowing that those minerals are coming from Congo. To my understanding, they are exactly the same way as Rwanda. Now they impose sanctions to Rwanda, showing the world that it's only Rwanda that is partaker of those deals, but they are part of it as well. Now, my point that I wanted to address is that if you look at the entire world, because there's things that we all know that is wrong just by the moral law of a human being. And I believe that life matters more than anything else. Not minerals, not a country, not anything else.
Of course.
But now there's millions of people who have been died in this war. There's no war that I know of that reached 12 million, not even the Second World War, which was, started by Hitler. It didn't reach 12 million, I don't think so. Now, my point is that
I think it did.
It did.
There were even, they say, 20 million died in the Eastern Front alone.
20 million.
Just in the Eastern Front, which was the biggest part of the war between Germany and Russia. And the war was huge. And then you think of the aerial bombardments when the Allies came in and leveled 63 cities in Germany, killing millions of civilians.
Okay, let me take a different example with that.
There must be other examples.
Osama bin Laden, one of the most well-known terrorists of the United States.
Yes.
And the United States did a market to show to the entire world that he's a bad man. We should hate him simply because he was doing the attack in the Americans, places.
Yeah. Over 3,000 people killed on September the 11th, 2001.
Absolutely. Yeah. But that is not equivalent to a million. And now compared to 12 million, I think there's no terrorist on the planet who can reach to that amount of people. And I'm not saying that only Congolese have a right to be protected. Rwandan as well. The Rwandan population, they need the same protection as the Congolese. Yes. People who are losing life are people.
Yes.
And I think that our duty as preachers is to address the issues that are taking these people's life or that putting people in kills.
I mean, why are foreign national troops, foreign armies in the Congo? Is Congo not a sovereign state? Why do you have so many foreign troops? Well, we know the answer. Many of the cabinet ministers of these countries whose armies are there have a private diamond mine or private cobalt mine or uranium mine in the Congo. So there's a lot of corruption going on. Because I don't think you've got a diamond mine somewhere. Why should a cabinet minister have the right to have a private diamond mine? The diamond mine should be national.
Absolutely. It's wrong in every sense, but I think peace matters more than money and more than wealth, more than those gold and diamond.
But the combating forces are there because they are extracting the riches of the Congo. The Congo potentially should be a very wealthy country with a very high standard of living.
I agree.
That was predicted. Congo is one of the most mineral-rich countries in the world, and then it's got the Congo River Basin, some of the best rainfall in the world, a phenomenal power. I mean, just the hydroelectric power capacity, potential of the Congo River. You could power every factory, every home in the whole continent of Africa just from the hydroelectric potential of the Congo River if they put hydroelectric power plants along the river. So the Congo could be a breadbasket and it could be the powerhouse of Africa. The people of the Congo should be wealthy people having a high standard of living, and yet they're impoverished and many are starving, dying of very basic diseases which just a bit of basic medical care could counter. And yet you can just see the Congo government is doing nothing for its people, and all these invading armies and the United Nations peacekeepers are not safeguarding, protecting, or helping the people of the Congo, not medically, not in terms of security, safety, not educationally. I mean, the people of Congo have been abused from the inception, it seems, and it's absolutely hideous. I don't think nobody's trying to blame President Trump and his administration in Congo. They did not create this crisis.
No, they did not.
But it would be nice if they could give some attention to cutting off the supplies wherever American companies might be involved, or other countries. They could put pressure on those countries. I fully agree with Donald Trump. America must stop interfering all over the world. They don't need to send troops or bomb people in other countries. Protect their own borders and leave the rest of the world alone. But they can still, out of a conscience, ensure that no more funding is given to evil. And to some extent, they've started that with closing down USAID, because US Agency for International Development was funding a lot of evil causes. LGBTQ this and diversity this and paying for comics down in Venezuela and gender-changing surgery for trans activists and so on in Guatemala. For goodness sakes, a DEI concert in Ireland, Sesame Street LGBTQ video in Iraq, millions and millions of dollars wasted on garbage. and then funding some very evil things too, like paying for the irrigation sprinkler systems for opium heroin plants in Afghanistan. I mean, how can you justify that? So the United States, I think, is on the right track that let's defund everything evil and bring our troops home and defend our own borders. I mean, if America could mind their own business, but have a conscience internationally in terms of you don't have to bomb people to show you care, you just need to cut off the funding to the evil sources.
I agree. And try to push your influence to stop the wars. Those are the things that I'm saying as well.
I think it would be more responsible not to be sending weapons into war zones.
Absolutely. Now, let's conclude by the peace in Ukraine, because it also matters, because people in Ukraine are suffering exactly as well. And to bring peace to them is something that we all embrace. Nobody can go against that. But when we look at that peace which is going to be taken, which is only Russia and America deciding from themselves.
Yes.
And people believe, which I might be part of those people, believe that Zelensky was just put in there as a puppet to, do what the NATO wanted to do, And that's why I think Trump realized that, and he didn't want to, include him in the peace talking.
Yeah.
Don't you think that is the reason?
That's insightful, yes. So basically, it was like the adults sat at the table. The children weren't invited. And they were treating the EU and even Vladimir Zelensky as the children. They're not ready yet. The adults are talking, the grown-ups are working out the peace deal. We'll bring you in later for some of the details. At one point, Zelensky made the comment saying, we can't be ignored, we're a sovereign country. And Elon Musk's response was, you're a funny man. Because Ukraine has not acted like a sovereign country. They've acted like a puppet in the United States. They've got biological warfare laboratories of the United States all over Ukraine, laboratories which would be illegal in America. But the American sovereign territory within Ukraine, where Ukrainian officials aren't allowed to go and inspect. So they've got them like embassies. These are biological warfare laboratories in Ukraine.
Okay.
Admitted even.
I think I will ask you about two things before we conclude. The first one will be, we saw that the United Nations, put a warrant of arrest to Vladimir Putin. And to my understanding, the one who's supposed to be arrested, because those are the people that caused the war, is the ex-president of the United States and Zelensky, Biden and Zelensky. Those are the people who they're supposed to arrest, because they are the reason why that war exists.
I agree. This is a cynical political maneuver to accuse Vladimir Putin of a war crime when what he was doing was what any president of Russia would have to do. It wasn't a Vladimir Putin issue. No president of Russia could have allowed NATO membership for a neighboring country like Ukraine, allowing to have Ukraine, which was always part of the Russian orbit, which was integral part of Russia. In fact, a huge amount of the Ukrainian population are Russian-speaking and Russian ethnically. To say that America could put missiles there, unacceptable. So plainly, they provoked this war, and I think the ICC giving a warrant of arrest for Putin was just politically motivated, and it's not acceptable. Quite right, they should have put it for Biden, and Biden for many, many things.
Absolutely.
His government did so many criminal activities, quite aside from the fact they probably stole the 2020 elections anyway, which is another story entirely. But he's an illegitimate president, he's a war criminal, and Zelensky has also not been an exemplary leader. He banned his opposition party. The 12 political parties in the country banned, only his party allowed. He banned every media outlet except his own. If it's not government-controlled media, it's illegal. He banned an entire Christian denomination, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, closed down their churches, arrested their ministers, confiscated their property. That is persecution of the church. I cannot support a leader who doesn't respect freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of worship, freedom of the press, freedom of speech. Hasn't even had elections since he became president. This is not a democratic leader. I mean, Zelensky, to me, is a puppet of the US State Department, and he's a client of the United States. He is, in fact, their employee, effectively. They've given him $350 billion, and he can't even account for $100 billion that's just missing by his own account that He doesn't know what happened to it.
Okay, is it the Ukraine part of the European Union, right?
No, they're not, but
Yeah.
they want to be.
They want to be.
But they treat it like they are.
Absolutely.
They've been funded and supported by the EU like they were part of them. They're not formally a member, because if they were, then the whole of NATO would have to go to war with Russia. They don't want to do that. So they're just using them as their puppet, as their surrogate.
But it's also, even though it's not part of the European Union, it is part of the European continent.
That's
and
right.
I think people should be treated equal under the law. And what I mean by that, I simply mean that the people in Ukraine have the same value with the people in Germany, have the same value with the people in France or England or wherever place.
They should have, but they don't.
Yes, that is my understanding. Now, why the European Union were not concerned about peace in Ukraine and preventing, people from dying, but they were there simply to sponsor the war rather than preventing the war?
Honestly, I think the reason is that they've had a cynical idea of using the Ukrainians like a political football in order to degrade the Russian military. Now, of course, many Russians have died in this war, and much of their equipment's been destroyed or captured in some cases. And in this way, Europe sees it makes Russia weaker for us to support Ukraine. So they're getting a third party to do the dirty work to make it easier for them, so that if they ever have to fight Russia, Russia's going to be weaker than they were at the beginning. So I think it's a very cynical, corrupt, evil thing to do, to abuse your neighbor in this way. So the poor Ukrainians, and it's not the first time Europe has betrayed Ukraine. Bear in mind, Ukraine was liberated back in the First World War. According to the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, when Germany defeated Russia in the First World War, they told Russia to make Ukraine independent and to recognize the independence of Finland, and they recognized the independence of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and Belarus. So in fact, the German peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk, 1917, gave liberty to all these countries, which later were invaded by the Soviet Union. The Allies in the Versailles Treaty betrayed Ukraine by handing them back to the Soviet Union. And Lenin came in and murdered millions. And Stalin killed millions more in the Holodomor, the hunger plague, where they literally confiscated the food from the farmers and let the farmers die of starvation, millions of them. And then the Ukrainians were liberated again, 1941, Operation Barbarossa. Germans swept through, the people were celebrating their freedom, they freed from the Soviet Union, get rid of the commissars and so on. Now they're a free Christian country again. And then the United States and Britain and Canada gave billions and billions of dollars and pounds of aid, weapons, tanks, trucks, bomber aircraft, fighter aircraft to the Soviet Union of Joseph Stalin, which enabled them to conquer Ukraine again. The Ukrainians never got one bullet, not one bomb, not one bandage from the West. And they were fighting for 10 years after the Second World War, kept expecting the Marines to come and rescue them. But in fact, there were no Marines coming. They were abandoned by the Yalta Agreement. Churchill of Britain and Franklin Delano Roosevelt of America betrayed Ukraine, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and all of Eastern Europe in the hands of Stalin. What they called a war for freedom, democracy, peace, civilization. They betrayed them. All over Eastern Europe, the Christians told me they were betrayed into the hands of the worst dictator, the worst mass murderer in history, Joseph Stalin, in the name of peace and democracy and freedom. So the poor Ukrainians were betrayed twice. Now they've been betrayed a third time. Europe has abused them. So the poor Ukrainians have every reason to distrust the Europeans. The European Union has treated them very badly.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned a lot of things about Donald Trump, but I also know that there's no one who's perfect. So do you mind if you maybe list two or one thing that you don't totally agree with what Trump have done so far?
Yes, I'm grateful for a lot of what he's done on domestic policy, and very grateful that he stepped in to bring an end to the horrible conflict in Ukraine. But he could be blamed for giving a blank check and no shortage of weapons and bombs to the state of Israel. That may be pouring fuel on the fire. That may not be helping. When so many Palestinians have been killed and so much in Gaza, which of course is Hamas's fault. Hamas started this war, 7th of October, terrorism and so on. But nevertheless, it doesn't seem a good idea to say, I'm giving you a blank check, you're going to give you all the bombs you want, no matter how big, no matter how huge, and you can do what you want. So in a sense, that's not bringing peace when you just give unlimited supply of weapons to one side. And while of course Israel's got every right to defend themselves against terrorism, but targeting of civilians is never acceptable.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Now, as a conclusion, I would like you to address a bit about, I know that there's no power without control. And we all believe that the United States is still the superpower, regardless that Russia is viewed as a country that has more nuclear power. But do you think that United States have any limitation in any sense that cannot bring peace to any particular conflict on the planet?
I believe the United States has funded a lot of the conflicts in the world. They've funded a lot of the destabilizing of countries, and we've even heard that USAID funded every race riot in Africa. And USAID's done a lot of evil in the name of leftist causes. They've been a terrible, corrupt, woke agency, so closing them down is a good thing. Russia's got the best hypersonic missiles in the world, the fastest nuclear missiles, and therefore Russia's got probably an edge over America when it comes to missiles because they've got the only hypersonic missiles. America doesn't have them yet. And they certainly don't have a counter. I don't think there is a counter to a hypersonic missile. They move too fast to intercept them. But still, aside from that, I don't believe Russia's planning to attack America if America leaves them alone. So, no, I don't think there's any restriction. If the United States will stop funding negative entities, they could probably bring peace to virtually every corner of the world.
I agree.
Now, their biggest problem now is Red China, and they acknowledge it. And Communist China could pick a war with Free China, Republic of China, Taiwan. And, of course, that would be a big challenge. And the United States is saying one of their strategic priorities is to move from Europe to focus on East Asia to counter the Red China and the threat of Red China to Taiwan. That is a priority, and that'll take some real ingenuity and some serious building up of their military might in the Pacific Ocean area. But aside from Red China, I think they could stop virtually all the other wars just by positive influence. And we're not saying that America needs to go in and bomb or send in troops. That's wrong. And there's a few inspiring examples. One example is President Teddy Roosevelt. In 1905, Japan and Russia were involved in a horrible war. And President Teddy Roosevelt got involved as a peacemaker. And he negotiated peace. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace between Russia and Japan and ending that war in 1905. Now, I can't remember when an American president brought peace since 1905. This might be the first time in Ukraine that an American president stepped in as a peacemaker. And that would be a good beginning. But then you can think of Henry Dunant. Henry Dunant was a Swiss citizen who started the International Committee of the Red Cross. Now, Switzerland doesn't attack anyone, and Switzerland doesn't bomb anyone. But Switzerland's involved in many conflicts, not as a belligerent, but as a peacemaker. They go in and they help the prisoners of war, they help the civilians, they break in medical care. They've done a lot to help refugees. If America could do something more like the Red Cross, follow Henry Dunant and the Red Cross example, think instead of isolationism from the world, have constructive engagement where you are engaged in the countries helping to bring peace, either through negotiation like President Teddy Roosevelt or as a humanitarian like Henry Dunant, who was an evangelical Christian. These are examples we should look at. I think that's a much better way of going forward than this warmongering, causing endless regime change, toppling governments, rigging elections. The US State Department and CIA have done some real destabilizing of the world. Just think of the Arab Spring and the toppling of governments in Libya, in Egypt, in Tunisia, Syria, what trouble that's caused, not to mention Rhodesia, betraying Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, or the toppling of the Shah of Iran and handing Iran over to the Ayatollah Khomeini back in 1979. The US government's got a lot of bad examples of what they did in the past. Maybe they should study Henry Dunant and Teddy Roosevelt for the way forward.
Yes, I would also maybe mention the reason why I'm a little bit concerned about the quick resolution of the conflict in Congo is because it may lead to an ethnicity war between Tutsi and Hutus again, and it may create a mass mass genocide that we have never seen before. And I think people are watching, but the result may be bad because more people are dying and, people's conscience is getting wiped away.
Yes.
And it might lead to a region war as well. So that's why I think is something that people should be concerned of as well. What do you think about that as well, Doctor?
Yes, I've got a strong view about that because, first of all, I'm concerned that people think, oh, we've got the United Nations peacekeepers there. Well, the United Nations is a secular agency that has a very bad track record. In fact, before the ICC in The Hague, they've got a case of 200 rape charges for United Nations forces against Congo civilians, the biggest mass rape since the Second World War. And the United Nations obviously cannot be trusted to bring peace. I would say, pull the UN out. They're wasting time and money. They're no good. They're just abusing the local population, looting, abusing the local population, even murdering. So I believe the answer's got to be missions. I think instead of us just looking to politicians to resolve the problem, let's send more missionaries into these areas. I believe instead of sending in the Marines, send in the missionaries. Instead of bombing the people, how about bringing Bibles? Instead of hate, how about love? So I think if the churches around the world would take more of a concern about fulfilling the Great Commission, instead of thinking what military entity can be sent in, how about our church sponsoring and supporting missionaries to the Congo? I think that will do more to help the people on the ground, to transform the hearts of people. And we've also got to win many of the guerrillas to Christ. We've got to give the gospel for guerrillas. We've got to have tracks for terrorists. We've got to bring Muslims to the Messiah. If we can think in terms of evangelizing our enemies, King David was a conqueror. King David killed Goliath, which was a great achievement. David was very small and Goliath was very big. But Jesus is more than a conqueror, and he calls us to be more than conquerors. Jesus took Saul, the persecutor of the church, and made him the Apostle Paul, the missionary and evangelist of the church. So our vision is, let's get more serious about sending missionaries into these conflict areas, like the Congo and the Middle East.
Thank you, Doctor. I think we are called to love. That is what we are called as Christians. And there is no Tutsi, Hutu, white, black, colored, Indian, or Chinese. We are all one according to the Bible. We are all of the same blood. And I think all life matters and we should care about one another, Don't think that you are killing someone because maybe they're not from the same place where you come and you will just get away from that. I think the judgment is coming. We should be aware that God is still coming to judge people. And the Bible says that, all the works of men that you've done, it will always be judged by God. So you have to know that in this world, you can escape, you can be rewarded by the system, you can manipulate people, but you can never corrupt God. God is a just judge and is going to judge all of us. So what would you say as a conclusion, Doctor?
Blessed are the peacemakers. Go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, preach the gospel to every creature. Those who sow in tears will reap with joy.
May God bless you. That is what we have for today, guys, and we look forward to see you in the next video. If you think that there's something that we missed in this video, please welcome to leave your comment below, and God bless you.